show an interest, are interested as well. So I think that those are the things that, let's see here, I got it. Okay. I think those are the things we needed to share about Zoom. So let's go ahead and turn to God in prayer. Loving God, thank you for all the ways you surround us with your care every moment of every day. We thank you this evening, especially for the bounty, wonder, and beauty of your creation, for the gift of life itself. Help us to be fervent protectors of that gift and give us the courage to work for just access to your creation for all of your children, all of humanity, and all of your creatures. We also lift up this nation in the midst of so much suffering and turmoil. We pray for genuine shalom in the coming days and weeks. Be with us during this time together. Help us gain new insight into how to be faithful advocates for your good creation. This we ask in Christ's name. Amen. So, again, welcome everybody. Just a quick word about who is putting this on. We are the state advocacy working group of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement that was formed after the 2019 Creation Justice Summit, which was held in Nashville, Tennessee. The formation of this group was a result of conversations that have taken place over several years now about how to significantly increase action for creation justice within the United Methodist Church at all of its levels. I believe we have a slide that's showing our statement of purpose. And you can also look at this at your leisure and find out a whole lot more information about our activities by going to the website umcreationjustice.org. You'll find that link to that website in the chat box. So what you see on the slide, it may be a little bit hard to read. So I'm just going to say what our work is. We think of our work in this way. First, to connect existing and emerging United Methodist Creation Justice efforts at all levels of the church for mutual support and inspiration. Second, to lift up the leadership and voices of frontline communities. Third, to collaborate with denominational, ecumenical, interfaith, environmental justice, community and civic organizations and movements to achieve shared aims of socio-ecological justice. And fourth, to mobilize the power of a network of networks within and outside the United Methodist Church for collective witness, action, public policy advocacy, and transformation. So that's a brief introduction to who we are, and I do invite you to please take a look at the website when you get a chance, because we have a lot of stuff on there that is good information and good resources and talks a little bit more about who we are and what we are all about. So what are we hoping to accomplish this evening as part of that larger work? The first thing to say is that this webinar is just one in a series geared towards building a strong movement of activists through a pattern of action and then reflecting on that action. We had a very introductory webinar on advocacy last spring, which is available on our YouTube channel. And we'll put a link to that in the chat, and in a follow-up email we'll be sending out. I think we'll be able to get that into the chat, but if not, we'll for sure send that with a follow-up email. And we have a couple more webinars that will be coming in February and March. The February one on federal legislation advocacy with the executive branch, and we'll be saying more about that further down. And there will be other webinars after that. So this is just the first in a series, or one in a series. Another thing to note is that, and I think this is really important to underscore, that this is a particularly auspicious time for honing our advocacy skills. With a new administration and a new Congress at the federal level. And in most of our states, we have new legislative bodies at the state level as well. So things are really at a turning point. And this is a good and a hopeful time to engage policymakers at all levels of government to say why it is so important that we do all we can to protect God's good creation and do it in a just way. And so tonight we will be doing the following four things. First, we will look at we'll take a look at how the official positions and teachings of the United Methodist Church, including our social principles and resolutions, can provide a framework for our creation justice advocacy. John Hill and Laura James from the Board of Church and Society will be the presenters for that section. Second, we will share some tips on how to effectively reach out to policymakers, especially in this time of COVID, this time of social distancing. And we have two experienced advocates, Christina Krost and Mel Caraway, who will lead that piece. Third, we will then divide everyone up into pairs. Hope you'll humor us and be willing to participate in that, to practice some skills that have been presented, especially to practice sharing your story. What is it that motivates you to be a creation justice advocate? Because as we'll be seeing later, our sharing our personal stories is really a key part of advocacy. And finally, we will invite you to take advocacy action at any level of government over the next few weeks, and then report what that experience was like for you in a shared Google document that we'll be getting to you, and in a follow-up webinar. So those are some introductory words to kind of set the context for this evening. So let's go ahead and get started. I will now turn things over to John Hill and Laura James with the Board of Church and Society. John is Deputy General Secretary for Advocacy and Grassroots Organizing and Director of Economic and Environmental Justice. And Laura is the Program Coordinator for Grassroots Organizing. Now, if you have questions for John or Laura, please put those in the chat, because after they present, there will be a short time for questions. So John and Laura, thank you for being part of this webinar. And if you could share your thoughts for about 20 minutes and then leave about 5 minutes for questions, that would be great. So take it away.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Paul, and welcome to everyone. First, just want to begin with a word of gratitude. Gratitude to the state level advocacy team for the invitation to be here this evening. Thank you to each of you as participants in your commitment to advocacy for climate justice. Just so grateful to be in this space with each and every single one of you. So tonight, John and I want to begin our discussion on faith-based advocacy by grounding ourselves in our why. You know, why as people of faith do we choose to engage in the ministry of advocacy? So I want to uncover our why by having you all respond to the short prompt that you see on your screen. So as a person of faith, I engage in advocacy for climate justice because. I engage in advocacy for climate justice because. So I invite you right now to take a minute and respond to this prompt in the chat. Oh, there's some great ones. We need to honor and protect God's creation. God demands it. Yes, amen. It's God's creation and the right thing to do. Because United Methodists are called to transform the world for future generations. I believe God gave us this beautiful gift. Yeah, those are great. Thank you all. We are called to be good stewards. Just a couple more. Climate justice is racial justice. Thank you, Nick from Tennessee. Yes. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. These are all great. A tree hugger, love it. Yeah, so as people of faith, grounding ourselves in our why and being intentional about how we engage in the ministry of advocacy is a testament to how we live our faith, which is ultimately the living gospel of Jesus Christ proclaimed in our world. And at the General Board of Church and Society, we are called to equip our church to live our faith, to seek justice, and to pursue peace. So as the church, when we take the time to gather like this and to invest in our understanding and knowledge of faith-based advocacy, we strengthen the ministry of justice that God has called us to, just like each and every one of you just said. So thank you, and I'm going to pass it to John.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks for all of you for those amazing answers in the chat. There's a lot of inspiration there, so I hope folks are taking the time to look at those. We know as United Methodist, as baptized believers, that we understand we are all called to ministry, a ministry of reconciliation between God and humankind and creation. Now, our responsibility at Church and Society that comes from our Book of Discipline is to show the members of both the church and society that the reconciliation God effected through Christ involves personal, social, and civic righteousness. And what I love about the work, the budding work of this United Methodist Creation Justice movement, is that it's inviting us to do all three, giving us ideas to take personal actions to better align our lives in ways that honor God's good creation, that we are connecting with others in our churches, in our communities, and that we are engaging in civic actions, that we are understanding how to do public witness and advocacy to start challenging those unjust policies and to transform systems of exploitation and oppression into systems that honor the dignity of all and protect God's good creation. Part of our responsibility at Church and Society is to ensure that the statements that we make as a denomination at General Conference, which is the only body that can speak for the United Methodist Church, that those statements that we wrestle with as a global communion, that they don't just sit on a shelf somewhere and gather dust, that we live into them, that we understand them, that we encourage others to understand them, and that we challenge those systems and structures that are preventing our vision of justice for God's people and God's planet. I would note that when we're not working from home, our offices are at the United Methodist Building, directly across from the Supreme Court and the US Capitol in Washington, DC, as well as at the Church Center of the United Nations in New York City, directly across from the UN, where we engage in a global conversation around creation issues. And at this point, Laura is going to walk us through sort of overview of a conversation on our United Methodist values.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and so when it comes to our social principles and book of resolutions and these wider statements of our social teachings as a church, our church adopts these at General Conference, but they're not church law. But they clearly state and affirm our church's position on social matters of our time. And in the area of climate justice, our United Methodist as social principles and church resolution grounds our advocacy in the living core of the United Methodist Christian faith, that centers scripture, tradition, experience, and reason, which is what we know as a Wesleyan quadrilateral. And engaging the Wesleyan quadrilateral. I think
7:10.
Hello, someone's talking. Okay, sorry. Just want to make sure we are all muted. Thank you. But once again, engaging the Wesleyan quadrilateral in matters of justice, similar to climate, allow us to center our United Methodist traditions and values so that we can intentionally proclaim our faith when we communicate with other advocates and with our decision makers. And specifically, the social principles and resolutions, they deeply embody a principle of solidarity that is inclusive of not just voices in the US, but all over the world. And specific to the social principles, there is this unique process where voices from all over our global church are engaged and listened to inform our church's social values. And so these statements not only represent, once again, what is happening in the US, but include a multitude of experiences and advocacy that is happening worldwide and serve as a moral and social witness to the church and decision makers as well. And so in this next slide that we have up, thank you so much, just want to focus on this quote from our new social principles in 2020, but we haven't had our general conference yet. So we're still waiting to affirm these as a church, but that doesn't take away from the powerful impact and inspiration that this language has. So I briefly want to read this and then kind of focus on just a specific part. So here are these words, we affirm our sacred calling to be responsible stewards and to lovingly tend all that God has wrought. We recognize the inherent worth of God's creation, celebrate Earth's abundance and diversity, and along with the entirety of the cosmos, give praise to its creator. We recognize we are interconnected members of complex and ecosystems, intricate webs of life, all of which have their origins in God's gracious act of creation. And so the statement that we, we've taken this process from many different voices, inclusive of our global church, that names, we are interconnected members of complex systems. I think as we consider our social principles, our resolutions, scripture, our United Methodist values that are inspired by all of those all of these statements, like we have to consider that it's not just one voice, but there's a multitude of voices when we come into our advocacy and begin to push for climate justice, that it's not just representative of just one understanding, but multiple. And I'll pass it back to you, John.
Thanks, Laura. So the next couple of slides, we're going to show some examples of specific statements affirmed by the General Conference, by our global connection. As we start to work through these, I do want to keep before us a couple of ideas, some things, ways in which these social teachings can really equip us as advocates. First, they can help us better understand, as Laura said, from a perspective beyond just our own. Our individual experience is very important, but from both a theological perspective and with the input of our global communion, understanding the challenges that we are facing. They're also a great resource that can undergird and inform how we respond to those challenges. So it may help equip us to evaluate the proposed legislations or community solutions. Often we include United Methodist social teachings in our correspondence with elected officials or in leave-behinds after visits, so that they understand that these are official positions of the church and while we are advocating, we are connected to a larger community. And lastly, these resolutions and framing can really help inform how we engage in advocacy, calling us to be connected to other voices, listening to other experiences, prioritizing the perspective and leadership of frontline communities, both within our church and beyond. So just to keep in mind different ways we might be able to use these, not just as sort of an intellectual or theoretical exercise, but as a practical equipping exercise for us as advocates. Now, Laura mentioned that we have submitted legislation to revise the social principles at our next general conference, but for now we are still operating with the social principles as amended in the last general conference in 2016. And much of our creation care work is founded in paragraph 160, which is the natural world, which states really clearly in its opening paragraph, and this is from the Book of Discipline, states clearly our responsibility and importantly, the inherent value of creation, that the elements of creation are to be valued and conserved because they are God's creation, not solely because they are useful to human beings. That's a very important perspective, certainly to share with elected officials who often don't hear that from other climate and environmental advocate groups. And then given the deep challenges that we're facing as creation, that we are called to seek changes to economic, political, social, and technological lifestyles to support a more ecologically equitable and sustainable world. So in that very opening paragraph, there are three core values, and these values are woven throughout United Methodist social teachings that include the inherent value of creation and our stewardship responsibilities, a call for justice, and a call to support a more equitable and sustainable world. So stewardship, sustainability, and justice are three common themes you're going to see through many of our United Methodist social teachings. This paragraph also includes more specific language related to energy. You can see the list on the slide: global climate stewardship, food justice, and I would invite you to explore these statements. They're all available on our website at umcjustice.org. Importantly, I'd also urge you to see these statements in the natural world connected to other sections of the social principles that call us to action on racial equity, on gender justice, living wages and economic justice, on global cooperation and peace building. Because we understand as advocates that the challenges we face are interconnected, and we must therefore understand that the solutions need to also reflect that interconnectedness. And as we're in a moment of understanding our commitment, our complicity in issues around racial justice, that we need to be clear that the work that we're doing in climate the work we're doing in creation care that is really centered in the natural world is inextricably linked to the language and the social principles related to racial justice. We talk about the social principles often. They're our overarching framework. I would like to talk a little bit about the Book of Resolutions, which offer more detailed statements, all derived from the social principles, but with a more expanded theological grounding, greater enumeration of the challenges, and some more specific calls to action. And again, in these resolutions, you're going to see common recurring themes of stewardship, sustainability, and justice. One of the foundational creation care resolutions is Resolution 1033, called Caring for Creation, a Call to Stewardship and Justice. You'll hear in this resolution language that echoes the social principles, talking about, after listing out many of the interconnected challenges and the crisis of the deterioration of God's creation, that we are called to a ministry of reconciliation between God, humankind, and creation, and that we ask forgiveness and commit ourselves to a new way of being that integrates environmental, economic, and social justice. You'll see there are many specific resolutions dealing with energy policy. So if we are doing advocacy specifically around energy, that's a great foundational resolution for us. Undergirding our work in climate change, we have a resolution on climate change and the church's response. As we've worked with and supported and heard from so many communities impacted by extractive industries, there is a specific resolution outlining our principles for just and sustainable extraction and production, much of which is in conversation and listening to the leadership of frontline communities. And then in this moment, I would like to really highlight the importance of the environmental racism conversation in the United States. There's a conversation, Resolution 1025, that both is a wonderful teaching tool, giving a history of the environmental justice movement in the United States, as well as a very explicit call that helps make concrete for us what we mean by justice. Sometimes we think of justice and it's difficult to put words as to what that would look like. Hear these words from Resolution 1025. We urge the United Methodist Church to make sure those who have historically experienced environmental racism are at the center of decision-making and employment for a just, sustainable, healthy prosperity. Again, as we're considering proposals to address the challenges, we want to make sure we're foregrounding the voices of impacted communities and ensuring that the solutions are actually addressing the inherent inequities that we're experiencing. So just as with the social principles, our engagement really does pull us into other parts of the Book of Resolutions, resolutions on racial justice, on economic justice, and on gender justice. All of these resolutions are available for you to read on our website, along with resources to help interpret, tools for education and action. And as we commit to a year of building a stronger movement of United Methodist advocates, I would encourage you, all of us, to reground ourselves in these teachings and to really see them as a tool for us for our advocacy. And now Laura's going to share a bit about how these principles can, in fact, help shape our advocacy efforts.
Thanks, John. So yes, like how do we give life to these words, right? How do we live out these principles of justice? So, as we're doing our advocacy and figuring out how a just and equitable climate solutions can truly be possible, we need to think about like our partnerships. Who are we engaged with? Who are we in relationship with to do this work? And at Church and Society, we do a lot of our work with partnered organizations and in coalition spaces. And I just want to uplift a couple of the tools that we've used and the ways that we've been resourced to do this work that is inclusive and in solidarity with those who are directly impacted and with those who, of course, are on the ground. And so one of the organizations that I'll lift up this evening is the U.S. Climate Action Network. And they have this tool that's called the Jedi tool, not related to Star Wars, but simply breaks down as the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion principles. And they have a checklist. And these statements really help the coalition and us as an agency really identify and understand what is our commitment to justice, what is our commitment to equity, and how are we living that out in the policies that we're aligning with, and the ways that we advocate with our decision makers. Another resource that US CAN has uplifted is VICA, which is a vision for equitable climate action as well, that when it comes to whether it is carbon pricing to 100% renewable energy, um, thoughts around the Green Climate Fund, it allows that policy document really allows us to center directly impacted and frontline communities to really see if we're advocating for this specific policy, how does it impact those who are directly impacted by systemic injustice, so that we're not just, attacking the solution, but we're making change that impacts us all. Um, and then lastly, specifically when it comes to carbon pricing, one thing I do want to bring up is within our interfaith coalitions on Capitol Hill, there's the equitable climate pricing principles that we also reference. And so it allows us to really, these different tools allow us to really consider and reflect upon how are we moving towards justice? How are we moving towards equity that is truly interconnected and reflective of the whole, because we can't simply just do this with just one eye on a solution. There are many solutions to tackling climate justice, and I look forward to hearing the many ways that each of you are engaged and how you will use these resources to better inform and equip each of you. So thank you all for your time, and I guess we will send it to Paul or Christina for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Laura and John. That was really wonderful. Thank you for that great kickoff to what we're doing this evening. And what's going to happen next is we'll see if there are some questions, and Andrea has been monitoring those. And Andrea, are there some that you have seen, and could you go ahead and share those with John and Laura? And we got about 5 minutes to do that.
Okay. All right, great. Yes, we have just a couple questions. The first is just confirming that the slides and the recording are going to be shared with everyone after the presentation, correct? Just to confirm that for everyone.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So you will get all of these resources that are being shared tonight, so you don't have to frantically be trying to write down all of the notes. And then if you could just say a few more words, and this would be to John or Laura, about the phrase the inherent worth of God's creation, just kind of expounding on inherent.
I can try to start. Maybe Laura will answer as well. I'll say that I live and work in Washington, D.C., and many of the conversations that happen at the federal level, and I think these are reflected at the state as well, there is a conversation around the sort of utility of things. And when we enter into a conversation around creation care, we often don't center the conversation around the intrinsic, the inherent value of creation beyond its utility for humankind. That we understood from Genesis that the creation was good before humankind was there. And so we need to be sure that we are protecting God's creation, not simply because it is a resource for us to use or that it would be a resource for future generations to use, both of which are part of the calculation, but that there's an intrinsic value in the created world beyond its utility for humankind. And too often in our conversations around policies that are governing the use or distribution or access to resources, that part of the conversation is missing, and is one that is uniquely is important for us from a faith perspective to bring, because very few other organizations would bring that up.
Great. Laura, did you want to add anything, or was that good?
Well, no, I mean, John put it great, but I guess I'll just quickly say, and also the utility when it comes to environmental racism, right? And how there is just almost, when it comes to environmental injustice and environmental racism, 90% of communities that are impacted are communities of color, right? And so when we think about how we are advocating, like how we consider that those communities are not deserving of the injustice that they have faced, that we have faced for centuries, for years. And so how do we prioritize that language and experience in the work and the advocacy that we do? That's all I'll add.
Okay, just one other question. What would be, and this is again for either one of you, what would be your advice on how to effectively engage in grassroots organizing on a congregational level that bleeds over into interfaith and civic cooperation?
Yeah, I guess I'll take that question. I think you have to be grounded in starting with relationships, especially at your congregation, right? They're making sure that you can be connected to at least one or more person in your congregation first who's excited and is passionate and committed to building change. And then before starting something new, going into your community and seeing, are there other congregations who are doing this, and starting relationships where they're already at, maybe not bringing something new, but just seeing what's already happening. And I think really starting from a place of intentional relationships and shared values is a way to really spread. Often, when we think about change and transformation, it happens through those personal relationships. So I think my number one piece of advice to get started to really build a movement is a relationship, starting with your local church and then moving on to other interfaith communities, as well as organizations who are doing the work of climate justice in your community.
Great, thank you, John and Laura and Andrea for helping us with the questions. And you did a fantastic job in talking about the why of our work and how it's deeply rooted in our Christian faith, and in our particular perspective as United Methodists. And so that was a really great way to get us started. And that last question, and Laura, your answer really takes us into the next section is, now that we've taken a look at the faith principles undergirding our advocacy work, the why of our work, we're now going to take time to look at how we can be effective advocates, and looking specifically at how we do that in the current context, in the time of social distancing, how we can engage our decision makers during a time of COVID. And to lead this section, we have two experienced advocates. We have Christina Krost, who is the Southern Illinois Outreach Coordinator for Faith in Place, the Illinois affiliate of Interfaith Power and Light. And she is also the United Methodist Women's Climate Justice Guide for the North Central Jurisdiction. And we have Mel Caraway, who is a retired United Methodist pastor in McKinney, Texas, and a Global Ministries Earthkeeper. He is past president of Texas Impact Board of Directors and currently serves as Texas Impact's Interfaith Climate Coordinator. So thank you, Christina and Mel. And I think Mel's going to get us started. And you will again have 20 minutes to present, and then we'll have 5 minutes for questions. And again, I just would remind folks that please don't hesitate to put questions into the chat box. And if we don't even get to them all on this webinar, we'll get back to you. We'll look at them and get back to you, even if we don't get to address them tonight. So Mel, why don't you take it away?
Had to get unmuted there. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. And as you saw earlier, this is about Zoom advocacy in the age of COVID and beyond, because we believe this is the new paradigm for how we can be effective advocates. For the past 11 months, we've been dealing with COVID, and it has made our lives generally, and especially our advocacy work for creation justice, very difficult. We're entering this new year with a new and more receptive administration in Washington, with new legislators in many states, but in-person advocacy will still be extremely limited. So the time is now for us to look at new ways of safely doing advocacy while social distancing. What I'm going to propose to you this evening is that using Zoom meetings with legislators and or their staff will be our primary form of in-person advocacy, not just now, but even after the pandemic is over. Give you a little background on how I came to this. In Texas, we have been doing Zoom advocacy with congressional offices for the past couple of months. And what we have focused on in that advocacy was the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis report, which was issued during the summer. It has 22 parts, but what we did is we pulled 6 parts of that out that are especially pertaining to us in Texas. And so that's what we focused our advocacy on. But how do we best go about advocacy via Zoom? I think there are a couple of guiding principles that we need to look at. First of all, who are you targeting? Are you targeting a congressperson, a senator, or is it someone in your state legislature? Or is it someone in your local elected officials? Second principle is, what is your ask? What are you hoping to do through this meeting? And finally, are you going to be meeting solo or with a group? One of the things that Laura was talking about is beginning with your congregation, but also going beyond that. Whether you meet solo, whether you meet with a group of people from your own congregation, whether you meet from a group within your legislative or congressional district, whether you meet with just United Methodist or an interfaith group, all of those are effective means of communication. So as we advocate for creation justice, the first key and probably the most important thing is your preparation. Do your homework. Understand that most of these Zoom calls that you're going to be participating in will be limited to about 15 minutes. Although some may go longer, some may be even less than that. So it's critically important that you do your homework ahead of time. When you're initially scheduling a call, you can either call the legislative office or you can send them an email. If you do send them an email, include in the subject line virtual meeting request. That helps them identify what you are looking for. Now, when you send that request to them, whether it's by phone or by email, most of those legislative offices will give you a choice of times to meet with them because they know better. They schedule their staff, their representatives, so they know how to do that. And in setting up that meeting, ask if the person you're going to be speaking with is the primary staffer who is working on the topic that you're calling about. You may want to ask if that person is working in the office or virtually. And very important, what is the best way to communicate directly with the person you're going to be engaging? Is it going to be by email? If you can get a cell phone number from them, that is very important because it gives you the opportunity for follow-up after the call, either by phone call or by text. And it's okay to ask for those cell phone numbers. Go right ahead and do it. If the person you are scheduled to meet with is not the primary staffer on climate and creation care issues, find out who the person is and get their direct contact information so that you can follow up with them after the call. Sometimes staffers don't always communicate everything that needs to be communicated with others on the staff. In the majority of cases, remember, you are going to be meeting with a staffer and they will want to know ahead of the meeting who's going to be on the call with you and what the topic's going to be. That's so they can hopefully get the proper staffer to meet with you. And if you're advocating for or against a specific piece of legislation, make sure you tell them what that is. If you're advocating for a broader range of interest, be specific as possible. For instance, when we did our calls with Texas Congress people, what we did is we were dealing with both Republican and Democratic members of Congress, and we were asking if they were familiar with the House Select Committee's report. Not surprising, there were some members on one side of the aisle who didn't know what we were talking about, and we had to send them the link to that so that they could get up to speed. Also, before your call, there are certain things that you need to be aware of about your legislator. Know what their religious affiliation is and what the position of their denomination is on the subject of your call. John and Laura did a great job of helping us understand the United Methodist position. It's expressed in both the social principles and the Book of Disciplines. One thing you might also want to be conversant with is the bishop's statement from 2009 on creation care. One thing that John will echo, because he was part of that meeting with a group of faith leaders in Madrid at COP25 a little over a year ago. Speaker Pelosi was very adamant in expressing the desire of legislators to hear specifically from the faith community. So what we need to be able to do is to express our advocacy in terms of our faith so that they can understand what the faith community is advocating for in terms of creation and climate. So also be aware of the committees that the legislator sits on and how they relate to the ask that you are making. Also, it's helpful to know what their sources of campaign financing are. Where did they receive their greatest financing gifts? Also be aware of their voting record and on the subject that you're asking, but also on social justice issues in general and on any public statements the legislator has made on your topic or creation justice. And by doing this homework, you are going to be able to present a more informed argument based on faith for the position that you're advocating for. Now, a sample call will begin with introductions of everybody that's on the call with you. My personal belief and experience is that 3 to 6 people probably makes an optimal call. Many more than that, and not everyone gets an opportunity to participate, but the introduction should explain your background, including your location, if you're from a church or a group of churches, or even an interdenominational group. What is your background? One person should take the lead on the call. One should be a note taker, and at least one, if not more than one, should have a personal story to tell, which highlights the purpose of the call. There also should be one person who is the closer, who will thank everyone on the call and recap the conversation briefly so that any need for follow-up can be set forth, whether it's follow-up that the group that you need to make to the staff or follow-up that the staff needs to make back to you. And also, I think it's important to have one person on the call who doesn't say anything, but serves as a fact checker for what the staff or legislator statements are in real time. I was part of one call where the legislator was on the call, and he said that greenhouse gas emissions didn't need to be lowered anymore, that we were doing everything we needed to do, and that was all we needed to do for the climate crisis. And of course, we know that that is not a factual statement, but we were able to fact check that in real time and get the correct information to him and his staff persons who were on the call. If you are speaking with the staffer, again, make sure that you are aware of what their responsibilities are. And if they're not the person who directly deals with that, find out who is and follow up with them after the call. Always begin your call by congratulating the legislator on their election or re-election and stating your hope that you will be able to work together throughout the legislative or congressional session. And always have a specific ask that you want the legislator to follow through on. And above all, don't be confrontational. Always be willing to listen to what they have to say, but don't let them dominate the conversation. This is always a two-way conversation, and you are trying to get them to come to agreement with the position that you are advocating. In many ways, these calls are just like visiting legislators in their offices. The differences are that there is a more limited time frame. Not everyone will get an opportunity to speak. Also, you won't get the opportunity to, as John mentioned, leave behind materials for them in the form of ask sheets or position papers. You can send them to them later on. Try to include everybody in your group in the conversation. And above all, emphasize the faith perspective that you are bringing to the conversation. We as United Methodists bring a uniquely United Methodist perspective, but I have been on calls recently with people from multiple denominations as well as Muslims and Jews who were all seeking the same thing. So whatever the faith perspective is, it's an important one for them to hear. And then when the call is ending, thank everyone from the office for taking time to meet with you, and always send a thank you note to whomever you met with. After the call is over, it's time to meet as a group and debrief the call, what went well, what could be improved upon. And don't look at this as a one-time opportunity. This is really just the beginning of an ongoing relationship. And that, in a nutshell, is what the new paradigm for advocacy is in the time of COVID and beyond. And now, I guess, Christina, you're gonna take.
Well, let me just ask about that, Mel and Christina. Christina, were you going to add anything more about at this point, or were you going to be waiting to introduce people to the breakout sessions? Because if you're not going to add to what Mel said, we'll go ahead and take time for questions now and see if Andrea has been monitoring those and has some questions for Mel. But were you going to add anything to what Mel said right then, Christina?
Nope, we'll go right to questions and then we'll go to our breakouts.
Okay. All right, Andrea, take it away with questions for Mel.
Yeah, I have just a couple. The first one is how receptive have you found legislators to be to scheduling cold call virtual meetings, or any tips on that?
Most offices understand now that in this time of COVID, this is the way that they are going to be meeting with constituents. And so they are receptive to that. The main issue is scheduling.
Okay. And then a couple people have the question about, with the staffer that was fact checking, how did you handle that without being confrontational with the staff member?
Fortunately, I have had a relationship with this particular congressman for about 6 years when he was a state senator in Texas previously, and he did not take offense with that. He said, we agree to disagree.
Okay. So it goes back to that relationship key.
It goes back to
Yeah.
it goes back to developing relationships that are ongoing. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then I just had one other question about how do we, as people of faith, encourage bipartisanship and specifically outreach to both liberals and conservatives to bring people together on this issue in our advocacy, I guess. Yeah.
Climate justice is justice for all of God's creation, and we are part of that creation. It's all God's people. And so when we seek this, we put it in a faith perspective, and that hopefully will transcend any partisan divides. But there are some people who are going to say that regulation is harmful, and I say that regulation is helpful. Regulations began in the Garden of Eden. And so they're not new.
And I think we just have one other question about, in terms of bringing people, people to the call with you. They just had a question about finding a legislator that would be a champion for the issue, such as, I know in the business world, unless you get the right person to champion the cause, no matter how solid your arguments are, it won't go as far.
Look at the House Select Committee on Climate Crisis report, and you have a list of about a dozen congressional representatives who are very receptive and supportive of the issue. And there are going to be similar groups in each state legislature that are going to be receptive. It's a matter of finding out what their track record is, finding out what their beliefs are, and pursuing them in that manner. So it takes research to do so. You have to put time in.
I would just, this is Paul, I would just add in that regard, and this may be what the questioner was getting at, and Andrea, what you are saying is that if you can find somebody to be part of the visit, the virtual visit, who has more of a connection with that person, with the person that you're trying to advocate with, either by way of the fact that they may be from the same faith tradition, they may be that they are, if you do your research enough, you may find that they're in the Kiwanis Club together. Just, that sort of personal connection can make a huge difference. And I think that's what you were saying earlier, Mel, about learning as much as you can about the
Absolutely.
person that you're going to be talking to, so that you can find out where the connections are and also be looking for common ground. Like jobs is an example of common ground. And if you can talk in terms of how moving to like clean energy economy can create good paying jobs in your community, that's an example that kind of bridges sort of sometimes the partisan gap. But that's just one example.
A lot of it is going to depend upon what your ask is, but again, finding that personal connection can be crucial.
Great. Anything else? Any other questions, Andrea? Or are we ready to move on to the?
Yeah, there was a question about the campaign financing, and Andrea, thank you for posting opensecrets.org. You can also Google most of your, if you Google your legislator's name, you can usually find in Google a list of campaign contributions.
Okay. Anything else, Andrea? Are we?
That's all. We're good. Thank
All
you.
right, great. Okay, thank you, Mel. That was great. All of the detail there was really helpful because, yeah, it's something that we all need to remember, those very important aspects of how to set the foundations for a good meeting, the advanced work on that, and then what to do once you're actually meeting the person.
And during the meeting, personal stories are crucial.
Right. All right. Well, okay. So Christina Krost, you want to take it away to this next section?
Yes, that is what I will do. I am just trying to set a timer on my phone so that we don't go over time. Hi, so I'm Christina Krost, and I am going to lead the breakout groups for you right now. And you know what? I didn't even spotlight my own self. Hold on. There we go. You can see me now. So we are going to take about, instead of 15, we're going to take about 10 minutes to practice our pitch. Practice what you would say to a legislator. So I'm going to break you down into groups of just 2 people. And I will stay out of a group so that I can help technically get everybody to where they need to go. So we will break into some smaller groups to practice the pitch with a partner. Be sure, and I will put these things in the chat so you can follow it along as you have time with your partner. Why is this important to you? What is it that would bring you to your elected official's office? And again, this could be mayor, this could be your state rep, this could be your state senator, or this could be, you know, someone more on the federal level. But why is this particular thing important to you? And how is your faith moving you to act in this moment? You might use the phrase, as a person of faith, and then finish that sentence to your elected official. And then what are you asking for? Are you asking for them to vote for a particular piece of legislation? Are you asking for them to ban fracking in your state? What is the ask? Be really specific. Just say, I want you to care. It's going to be tough. They might care. They might be stuck with, you know, particular legislation that's not very good. So having a really specific ask is very helpful. And then be thinking, who could join you on this phone call? So you might not be able to answer this today, but keep this in the back of your mind that it's very intimidating to meet with a lawmaker by yourself. When you have people that you can do this with, that makes it a little less scary. So be thinking, who could join you? Even just 1 or 2 other people. I usually drag my spouse or a teenage child with me to these these kinds of meetings. And believe it or not, legislators kind of like listening to the young people. So just a thought. So I'm going to break you into groups right now. I will give you a heads up when we have about a minute left to wrap up your conversations. And then we'll come back together to the group and we'll talk about next steps. What do we do now? So practice your pitch. Think about what is important to you, what you're asking, how your faith is driving you to act here. And then we'll practice and we'll come back together. So let me get to the breakout rooms. How many of us are there? All right, we're going to create 24 breakout rooms, actually 23. All right, ready, set, go. So click on accept or go to the room.
Pardon? Okay, I think we have to mute now.
All right, we are wandering back. Can everybody hear me? I see nodding. That's good. Okay.
Yes.
Looks like the technical stuff actually worked. That's great. Okay. I think that's about all of us. So here comes the ask. We are asking all of you who have now practiced your pitch to your elected official at whatever level that may be to take some time in the next few weeks to contact an elected official. Who you contact is up to you. What you contact them about is up to you. You might have a new state rep right now. You might have a new federal rep right now. That it might be a good opportunity to introduce yourself and say, hey, these things are important to me and I just want you to know about them. So as Mel said, make sure that we are building relationships with our representatives, perhaps congratulating them on their election. Whether or not you're really excited about their candidacy or not, you congratulate them and you need to build a relationship with them because they're going to be there for a while. So it's best to form a relationship with them. So we're asking you to contact an elected official. And then I will be sending through the follow-up email tomorrow a Google form or a link to a Google form to kind of debrief how your call went. Now, this might be a Zoom call where you video chat like this. It might be a phone call. I would guess it's not going to be an in-person meeting, but I don't know your life. But I would hope that at the very least we're masked and we're social distancing if there's going to be any in-person anything happening. But I would hope that we're doing Zoom meetings or phone calls for the duration right now. So fill out this Google form to let us know how it went. And at the end of that Google form, it asks if you're willing to be part of a grassroots network that we are trying to build of advocates in every state. So that when something comes up, maybe at the federal level, maybe at the state level, we have people that we can count on to advance the cause either for or against that particular legislation. We know we have faithful people in every state who can get that message out to other advocates as well to say, we need to mobilize around this particular item, and we need to do it because we're people of faith and we care about creation. And that is part of our Christian walk. So this is kind of a twofold activity, contacting elected officials, filling out the Google form to debrief how that went, and then letting us know if you're willing to be part of this grassroots network of advocates that we are trying to build in every state. So the next steps this evening are that we will be sending you a follow-up email. I know we've referenced this several times tonight. So these slides that we presented tonight will be linked to the follow-up email. We'll also include links to the creationjustice.org website, as well as the Church and Society website. You'll get a recording of this presentation as well. And the Google form that I just mentioned will be in that email as well. It might be it's a lot of content. It might be a little overwhelming, but be looking for that in your email boxes sometime tomorrow. I wanted also to flag for you a webinar coming up in February regarding federal advocacy. So today we were talking mostly about whatever level you feel comfortable, but that often starts small, maybe at your city level or your state level, working your way up to maybe federal policy. So that webinar around more federal policy is going to be held on February 25th, and there'll be details coming soon on that as well. All right, I think we're back to Paul. Where'd Paul go? Paul, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. That's always fun when we do that. So anyway, I was just saying, if you couldn't read my lips, I was saying thanks, Christina, and for that work, and Mel for your sharing, and that was really, my person that I talked to said it was really helpful. So just again, we will have the follow-up stuff going on in the February 25th webinar and that'll be at 6 o'clock Central Time, and you will get more about that. And going to be focusing on executive and congressional action, kind of the lay of the land in Washington, D.C. For climate justice and steep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So climate change is going to be the real focus of that, and you will receive registration information soon. And then also we will have a follow-up webinar, probably in March, where we will have a chance to share what our advocacy experiences have been like that we've been inviting you to do. So in closing, just want to thank all of you for being part of this webinar. Thanks to John and Laura and Christina and Mel for their presentations, and Andrea for helping with the chat questions. We really look forward to being in further conversation and in building this network as we take action and reflect on how to increasingly be effective in this just vitally important work of care for God's good creation and justice for all God's creatures. So be looking for the email, as Christina said, and there'll be a lot more information coming. And also remember that umcreationjustice.org website, which has a lot more information about who we are. Just want to close with this blessing. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may God give us all the deep passion, wisdom, courage, and love to be better protectors of creation. And I think love is such an important part of that. And in these really difficult times, let's all pray and work for health, for peace, and for justice in our nation. And again, we just offer all of this and ask all of this in Christ's name. And just ask you to go in peace and be well and be safe. Amen.
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 So Christina, thank you so much you're the only one I can see. I don't know. Oh, there's Mel. I think I need to go to.
Yeah, good job. That was great. Paul, Mel, Christina.
Karen.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, good job. John, Laura. That was great. Great information.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Christina and Paul and Mel and everyone. This was fabulous. So good.
It's good to see faces now. I didn't quite know how to do it where I could be seeing everybody and still watching what I was supposed to be saying, but so good to see a few folks there that I don't know, but yeah.
Karen.
Yes.
Karen, next week is a better time for me to talk.
Yes, good. Okay. Yeah, next week is our Days for All People with Virginia Interfaith. We're doing jointly this year because of being virtual. So we're actually going to be meeting with our legislators. So it'll be a lot of Zoom